Great. Hey, everybody. This is Emma with the Mind Unleashed. We are going to talk a little bit about Jeffrey Epstein and what's going on with that case right now. I'm sure everybody has heard the news already that he is apparently no longer alive. And obviously, with the entire situation that has been going on for years, there have been a lot of questions surrounding this case, and now we've got a lot more questions now that he is supposedly dead. Personally, I wanted to point out that I've seen a lot of debate and discussion centering on if Epstein was murdered, if he was allowed to commit suicide, if he left prison and he's living happily on an isolated island somewhere. I think it's fine for people to ask those questions, but the truth is we're probably not going to know the truth when it comes to that stuff, unfortunately. But the reality right now is that Epstein is no longer going to face trial, regardless of what happened to him and where he is right now. His portion of this trial is done. So that means the reality right now is that we, the general population, everybody watching this, everybody watching the news, needs to hold the entire system accountable, and we need to make sure that his victims see justice, basically by whatever means possible. So I'm here with a couple of people who have been following this case for a lot longer than it's been in the media, a lot longer than a lot of people have been paying attention to it. So I wanted to give them a chance to introduce themselves, and we can ask a couple of questions and kind of get their input on the status of things right now. So I've got Derrick Broze here, who has been my source on information about this case for a while now. I think it's impressive that he's been following it for so long. He's looked into this case in a lot of ways that a lot of people haven't. He recently traveled to Florida to be one of the only media present when stuff was going on with the case there. And then I also have Sam here, who I know a lot of people that I know of him as the guy with the man bun who brought a picture of Epstein to one of Trump's rallies in Duluth, Minnesota. And Trump took note and criticized his hair at the time. But I know you've been following this, obviously, for quite a long time, too. So I think the two of you are two important voices to pay attention to right now, because you haven't just learned about it. You're not just starting to report on it now. It's something that you've cared about for a while. So Derrick, do you want to talk a little bit more about you and when you first started paying attention to this and how you've been involved and maybe kind of what your thinking is right now after yesterday's news?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said in the other day's video, I've been covering this for the Mind Unleashed, but also for other websites and for my own independent network for the Conscious Resistance website and YouTube channel since I'd probably say about 2014 paying attention to it, but I started putting out content in 2015. I actually wrote an article for the antimedia.com about the little black book, Epstein's black book with all his context back in 2015 during the last election, and kind of drawing the connections between Trump and the Clintons as well as others. So I was covering it back then. And then I guess around last summer, I happened to be in Florida, and I remember thinking about Epstein and just starting to look up what was going on with the case, where things were, because as most of the listeners know, that the case had been over for a decade in 2008 when he got the sweetheart deal. So it was pretty much over and done as far as most people were concerned. But the victims and the attorneys defending them haven't stopped fighting for justice that entire time. They've continued to try to file lawsuits and fighting all kinds of defamation lawsuits again, back and forth from Epstein's people who are accusing them of lying and trying to just get rich off Epstein. So I was following that case, and I happened to be in Florida. I was able to go outside of Epstein's house, the mansion in Palm Beach, and film a short scene that ended up being in my documentary, Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. And that documentary came out last October, about a month before the Miami Herald started reporting. And they did a good job. The Herald, Julie Brown, did a really great job. Their series, I think it was a 3-part series called Perversion of Justice, something along those lines. And we've had a lot of more details come out since then, and just recently with this release of thousands of pages of documents. But honestly, the thing that I want to make sure to kind of interject there, as far as we're talking about where do we go from here, whether Epstein's dead or whether he's been funneled off to a witness protection program or whether he was murdered, like you said, I agree. We're not going to know the truth, and it does that feeling alone just kind of sucks. Just taking that in, like, wow, like we're probably not going to get to the bottom of this one if we thought maybe we were getting close. And I think there's still more truth to come out. But as far as what exactly happened to Epstein, I don't think we're going to know exactly. So it's important for us to look at the information itself and to look at the other co-conspirators, the people who are still around. And honestly, it's been a good thing the mainstream corporate media has been reporting on it. But most of the things that they're reporting on are things that have been known for years, honestly. I mean, there hasn't been anything major breaking that they've reported that you couldn't have already seen from the existing depositions and from the existing witness testimony and from the existing statements from lawyers and court documents and stuff like that. So, the last few days, there's been a big deal made about these pages that were released right before he committed suicide or whatever happened. And there were a couple of new names in there, a stronger indication of former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson and things like that. But for the most part, the names were already known. So I think there's some interesting things going on here where, the media is stepping up. All of a sudden, everybody is a conspiracy theorist and people are willing to ask questions that just a year ago, 2 years ago, you were crazy for even implying these things. And now it's becoming kind of mainstream. So I'm not sure what the goal here is. I don't know if Epstein was murdered, if he was suicided or what have you. I think that you can look at it from multiple angles and see that, he probably had a reason to kill himself if he knows he's about to spend his life in prison. And pedophiles don't usually last very long in prison anyways. People target them. And it's also possible that the various people he's connected to, we've talked about in my documentary, and I've seen some great reporting from Mint Press News and elsewhere looking at and even the mainstream saying, is Epstein a Mossad agent? It's crazy to see that they're actually asking these questions. So there's all sorts of areas where it could have been an intelligence hit. It could have been, some of these power players that people are concerned, the Clintons and the Trumps and whoever else is, or Prince Andrew. I mean, we could speculate all day, but at the end of the day, we don't know what happened to him. All I know is that there's still a lot of people who could be brought down. And allegedly, the investigations are going to continue. Bill Barr says he's going to investigate it. The FBI says they're going to investigate it. But the lawyers themselves say, okay, well, the federal trial against Epstein is over, but civil trials could still continue to bring more evidence. And then if there's enough corroboration of evidence, other people could be charged eventually. Some of these other names we keep hearing about. So it is important, as you stated in the beginning, for the public not to let this just die down and be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Sam, I'll ask you a question now and give you a chance to introduce yourself a bit and talk about maybe when you first became aware of this guy and how long you've been working and what else you've done besides taking that picture with you to the Trump rally. But one thing that I'd like to talk a bit about is where the focus should go next. Obviously, like Derrick said, there are a lot of names. There are a lot of other people that have been involved with this, but I think that his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, is probably one of the best places to focus next. The mainstream articles are not hiding the fact that she was basically, I guess, his right-hand woman and involved in everything that he was doing. Do you know about her status right now, or what as being pursued in that area at all?
Well, hi, thanks for having me. As far as my knowledge of Ghislaine Maxwell goes, I think there has been an ongoing court battle, which some of these documents that were released pertain to, between the lawsuit between Virginia Giuffre and Julie Brown. Her name's attached to those documents, and Ghislaine Maxwell is the other party to that lawsuit. Now, obviously her lawyers would know more about where she is, and hopefully law enforcement knows where she is. Within the Jeffrey Epstein indictment, there were references to other parties, such as the, handlers and employees. So it's pretty clear that the SDNY has to know who those parties are and either have some sort of agreement with them or potentially, still considering charges with them. The one good thing to come out of, an official capacity yesterday after the news of the suicide was that SDNY says they're still going to move forward with the investigation. So hopefully they're not dropping the ball. But yeah, my involvement stems from prior to the 2016 election, probably having come across Epstein in a way in the past, but really digging in and doing my own research in the run-up to 2016 election. And honestly, this issue to me seemed to be the perfect wedge because I wasn't a strong supporter of either of the major candidates. It seemed that they were both connected to Epstein, so why shouldn't both candidates have to answer for what they know about this guy and what they're willing to do about Jeffrey Epstein? Now, everyone's asking that. So we've come a long way. I was able to infiltrate a Trump rally, hold up the picture of Epstein and Trump side by side, and just had the text, "Who is Jeffrey Epstein?" on there. And that turned out a number of articles. This is prior to Perversion of Justice coming out as well, and before a lot of us were able to even network as like Epstein sleuths on Twitter. And I'm happy to see that network has grown exponentially, and no doubt yesterday's news is going to turn even more eyes onto this issue, which we cannot allow to slip away. When even the mainstream journalists are starting to question, the official story, I think that is an honest reaction that they're having. I think we have no reason to trust anything that comes out of the Department of Justice after what William Barr has pulled over the short time that he's been there and over his career, having connections directly to Epstein. So everyone should have their skeptical hats on. We don't need to waste time diving into every conspiracy, but we do need to continue to fuel this investigation by doing our own journalism, speaking to other higher up mainstream journalists, and making sure that these questions get posed, especially to Donald Trump, especially to any other accomplices of Epstein that we know their names. And I would say to all of the 2020 candidates as well, what are you going to do about this? Mm-hmm. And hold their feet to the fire as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point with the 2020 candidates, since we have their ear, or we should right now. they should be able to answer our questions about big stuff like this. And it is great, as you mentioned, that it's being questioned in the mainstream media, in the corporate media that most people consume right now. But it is important for those of us in independent journalism to continue with this cause, especially because we know that corporate media, mainstream media doesn't continue with a topic to see it through to the end. Even just a week ago, we weren't seeing Epstein in the news as much anymore. There was other stuff that was notable in the news. We had 3 big shootings in the country that everybody was paying attention to. We had obviously stuff going on that was important, but they're really quick to stop reporting on something if they're told to stop reporting on something, or if there's something that pops up that's more productive. Following even just yesterday, since I work in independent media, I keep an eye on what's talked about in the media, what people are clicking on, what people care about. And yesterday, a lot of the news that was most important, obviously, was what happened to him. And then it became what Trump had tweeted about, that he tweeted the whole Clinton body count thing. But then all of that actually took second and third place to Miley Cyrus having broken up with somebody, that on the grand scale of what's trending, that ended up being what people wanted to click on. Maybe they wanted a break from all this other stuff, but the fact was that the mainstream media was reporting on that, and they were reporting on it a little bit more, and that's just disappointing. So it is up to us to keep going with this story, because I don't think that they'll see it through to the end, unfortunately.
Well, absolutely. But let's ask Miley Cyrus what she thinks about it.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
Start connecting the dots.
Yes.
There's plenty of celebrities that have weighed in on how they feel about this and are very out front. So I say we keep working with them.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great idea. Even a lot of people like AOC tweeted about it, and people were like, "Yay, she tweeted about it," and that's great. But they're just like screenshotting her tweet, or they're like embedding it in an article, but they're not like, we need to keep engaging with the people who are already questioning this and keep it in the forefront of their minds and their what they're putting out into the public before someone potentially tells them not to, because we know throughout this whole story that different mainstream journalists, different people have been told you shouldn't touch this story. And that's probably going to keep happening, unfortunately. So Derrick, let's go back to you. What do you think should happen next outside of maybe what the government is doing in their investigation? Because unfortunately, like Sam mentioned, we can't necessarily trust the Department of Justice on this. Epstein was involved with all of these people on the top. Like it stinks, but we can't fully trust what's going on that end. But what can people like us do?
Well, obviously, those who are, internet sleuths or independent media journalists or just curious researchers can continue to ask these questions, and whether that means writing articles, making YouTube videos, printing out flyers, just talking to friends and family, not just about Epstein. Obviously, Epstein is the focal point of this whole incident, but the kind of bigger picture of what Epstein represents. Because I think that if there's anything good to come out of this, because I've heard such a range of responses to this, particularly through my YouTube channel, there's people saying, oh, this is a distraction from something else, just as important as exposing a pedophile network. I don't know what exactly they mean, what we're being distracted from, but, I can hear them out, I guess. Sometimes there are big media events that are distractions, but in this case, I feel like Epstein and what it relates to is really probably one of the biggest stories that we've seen in our particular time. When you look back and you hear stories about other prominent individuals being implicated in pedophile rings or in sex crimes, you can look over in the UK with Jimmy Savile, and you can look back to the 80s and what has become known as the Franklin scandal. And in addition to my documentary on Jeffrey Epstein, I covered a story on a group known as the Finders that was mainstream news in the 80s and early 90s, openly being reported as connected to the CIA. And so I think that it's important for people to, there's kind of like a delicate balance to strike between following this story and every bit of minutia that comes out. Because, if you look up Epstein, there's any video about Epstein right now is going to be trending, is going to be popping because of what has come to be known as the kind of infotainment, conspiratainment, where there are a lot of people who are obsessed with this material. And I don't mean in like a healthy way where they're like digging into it and they're sharing with people and they're, we need to find solutions. It's like people are obsessed and drawn to this kind of train wreck of stories about powerful people involved in sex trafficking rings, pedophilia, politicians, Hollywood, all of this stuff, things that were only a conspiracy just a year or 2 years ago and connected to, things like Pizzagate. Are now actually being considered or even talked about more in the mainstream world, which is a positive thing itself. But I do think, again, there's that balance between digging into the information and trying to do something proactive about it, and then just getting sucked into that rabbit hole. Because from what I see from running my YouTube channel is I can notice a clear difference between, say, I do a video focused on a solutions thing. Maybe it's focused on getting active in your community, even say particularly related to Epstein, and then doing a video about Epstein and the Clintons and the Trumps and all these kind of people. And the one that's about that will go much further and go viral before anything about solutions. And I've seen that over the years. And I think it is because there is this conspiratainment, infotainment kind of thing where people will just hop from their favorite YouTube channel to YouTube channel to YouTube channel and just like, what are they saying about Epstein? Okay, I need to know about this. I need to know about this piece. And it is relevant. I mean, there are a lot of deep dives that are necessary in order to understand what is going on. But I don't necessarily see that people are following this research up with actionable solutions. It seems like they're getting sucked into a rabbit hole. And then some get sucked into a mentality of this, what I would consider to be a defeatist mentality of like, well, they control everything. Like, and again, it does sometimes feel that way. I mean, we just had a chance to get this guy who we know is connected to all kinds of people to potentially make it to trial and maybe bring more revelations if he was offered a good sentence or something along those lines. I was already skeptical when I found out about a week and a half ago that they were saying the trial wasn't going to, that the lawyers were arguing for either June 2020 or September 2020. And it's like, okay, so they're going to put this whole thing off for a year, make sure everybody forgets all about it. And then, of course, I was also worried, like, is he even going to make it that far? And obviously, one way or another, he's not making it to that trial. So we have to stay on it. I think it's important to keep digging into it, but at the same time, strike that delicate balance between getting sucked into just obsessing over this material. Because if you're not doing anything with the knowledge, then what is it other than just, I guess it's awareness, but it can help. It can get you to a really dark place where it feels like there's nothing we can do. These people control everything. Look, they just killed Epstein. They can get to people in prison. They control the media, and all of these things are factual. These are like, we're talking about real topics. So I'm not saying we should ignore them, but find a way to look into this material and to educate other people without getting sucked into a rabbit hole of hopelessness.
Definitely. I just tossed the link to your Finders documentary in the comments here, because I watched that and I loved it. Thank you for doing that. I think that's a great example of you specifically, and a huge difference that you can draw between mainstream journalists and independent journalists, that you put in a ton of time and you put in a ton of research into doing something like that. And it was really well done, and it's really important. And it is part of the bigger picture of what's happening with this individual case, but just how this is a pervasive problem that we see in other countries and other forms of government and in all kinds of things. And that is important to remember, to step back and look at the big picture, that this isn't just one guy who's doing this and now that he's dead, it's done. This is something that we need to keep fighting about for probably ever.
And I think that's what the media is going to try to do, is to try to just say, well, Epstein's gone, we got this guy, and they'll hope that, and I guarantee you all the people who are potentially connected to Epstein and involved in this sex trafficking are more than happy to let the media forget about this and move forward, and I just, it's a scary thought to think that, as we move forward into this type of research, right, people are going to look back at this time and there's going to be people who think like, well, we got him, he killed himself and that was the end of it. And others who are still asking these questions, and still 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, like say in the JFK case, 50 years later, still asking questions. I think that's what disturbs me the most, is just not getting to the bottom of it.
Definitely. Also in the comments there, I added a link to the Mind Unleashed, all of the articles that we've had about him, and some of them are by you, Derrick, and some of them are by other journalists that we have, or aggregated from other places. But I was wondering about you two, where you think, in addition to yourself, Derrick, good sources for people to get information, whether it's mainstream sources, because some are better than others, where you would point people who want to stay on top of this and feel like they can trust the information that they're reading. Where do you go, Sam, when you want information about this topic?
Well, I think I've been able to tap into some pretty good sources just through going on Twitter, and have been on some shows with people who've been ahead of the curve as far as research goes. Guys like Pierce Redmond, who runs a show called Pork and Policy Review, and he's done some really good work on investigating Epstein. A guy named Ed Opperman is an interesting voice, who's a private investigator who claims to be directly connected to the Trump-Epstein lawsuits, and I think he's got a lot of credibility as well. There's a couple of independent journalists who are putting out a series called The Secret Life of Jeffrey Epstein right now through their narrative channel. So I would suggest looking them up. Vicky Ward has been a pretty good voice on following with Jeffrey Epstein, but also digging into the Kushner family, and she's a pretty good voice in the mainstream. But I think in order for this to keep going, for us not to lose interest, is going to take real people getting involved. This is a minor setback. I think it's going to be important for victims to continue to have a platform. Hopefully more will come forward. Maybe they'll feel safer to do so now. But hopefully the lawyers that are involved will bring their clients, either in civil suits or wherever this needs to go. But as far as activists and journalists just showing up at the either the Trump rallies or at other political events, interacting face to face with journalists and politicians, anybody who is connected to this, especially those who are in Epstein's black book. The list is out there. The New York Magazine did a very comprehensive dive into all the names, and it's worth looking into. These are public figures that anyone can approach with a camera and get them on the record.
I know that on Twitter you're really active with putting this in front of people and responding to other people's tweets and trying to get a response. Where can people find you if people want to kind of see what you're doing and maybe take your lead and use you as an example if they want to get involved in the same way?
Yeah, you can follow me at Sam Spadino, Spadino, and I'll be doing more videos in the months to come as well. But looking to gather a long-haired army of people. I don't recommend putting yourself into harm's way in a Trump rally unless you're prepared for the potential fallout of that. Obviously, you're going to be dealing with a lot of angry people. I spent a night in jail because I was kind of a lie was told about me to the Secret Service, basically, which resulted in me getting shaken down by them and going through my social media and whatnot, and having to deal with a lawyer. So that, all takes a toll, and especially when we're dealing with a pedophile conspiracy here, it was a very scary thing. So now that Epstein's no longer with us, that opens the door to keep asking this question, but yeah, maybe turn the attention to Maxwell or some of the other people that are in the orbit that are still alive and still running loose.
Okay. I'm going to put a link to your Twitter in the comments here if anybody wants to follow along with what you're doing, because I think what you've said makes a lot of sense, especially for people who don't necessarily want to or don't feel comfortable or can't get out there and with a video camera and get in people's faces, or aren't comfortable going to a Trump rally and stuff, that you can do stuff online. You can be a keyboard warrior in this way. And I think you're a good example of how to do that. So I put that link in there if anybody wants to follow along with you. And then what about you, Derrick? Where would you suggest people kind of keep their eyes right now?
Yeah, as far as gathering sources, I do still recommend just reading the documents, the court documents, which, then that means, I'm talking about the 2,000 plus pages that were just released on Friday, but also the pre-existing documents. And, I think one thing that confuses some folks when they start diving down the Epstein rabbit hole is that there's so many court cases involved that it's not just there's one case against Epstein. You have the case against Epstein, and then you have Virginia suing Maxwell for defamation, and then Alan Dershowitz suing her for libel, and kind of this back and forth, them suing the lawyers that are defending the victims. And so there was lots of different cases going on, but each of them has various pieces of evidence because they've presented them in different ways. Like, for example, whenever Alan Dershowitz or Epstein and his associates say, oh, these victims are liars, or this person's a liar, or these lawyers are just trying to sue us for money, the lawyers say, well, here's all this documentation that we've presented. This is why we're suing him. And one of those cases in December, the one you were referencing, resulted in Epstein having to make an official apology and pretty much coming as close to as possible as admitting the truth of these cases. He basically said, I admittedly went after this lawyer because he was doing such a great job litigating against me, like is what the apology said. And, and essentially admitted that what he was filing on was factual. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of cases going on here, but if you start to look into those court documents, and they're out there, you just got to do a little bit of research. And I'm happy to send anybody some. You can reach out to me at the Conscious Resistance website. But I would really focus on that because, there are a lot of the sources that Sam mentioned are all good as well. And there's definitely other channels. And, my channel, we've got 20 plus different videos looking at Maxwell and her family and the Mossad connection and this claim that Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago and all the different various pieces of the puzzle. But it comes from the documents and the court records, really, essentially. And I'm also planning on producing a part 2 of my documentary, Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein, which if anybody hasn't seen that yet, I do recommend checking that out. You can find it on YouTube. It's just about a half hour long. And I'm going to do a second part of that, which will obviously be updating everything that's going on. But I'm going to try to reach out to the lawyers that I've interviewed and see if we can get them to speak, a little bit more currently to what we're dealing with now and what's going on. And so if anybody wants to stay tuned for that, you can check out theconsciousresistance.com.
Awesome. I'm putting a link in the comments for that video that you just mentioned and your YouTube channel in general, and also your website. So for whoever wants to keep up with that, you don't have an excuse because you can click on it right now in the comments. You don't have to find it yourself. And there's also one more I wanted to add. I was going to get a link to the series right now that Mint Press News has from Whitney Webb, where she's delved into more of the history of people who Epstein is connected to, and the idea of sexual blackmail being a thing that exists in our government right now and has for years. And that's another thing that, even a few months ago or a couple of years ago, you suggest the idea of something like that existing to people, and they'd think you were crazy. You suggest the stuff that we know now about having a pedophile network like this, and it's not something that people would spend time listening to you about generally. So there's a lot coming to light, and a lot of stuff that I think people don't necessarily want to recognize. It's not comfortable, and it's not pleasant, but we need to know what's going on in the background, especially when it's our actual government or the heads of these large corporations that we work for. We spend our money at every day. The government's getting our tax dollars and they're doing things in our name. We need to know what's going on, and we need to know who are the players in this. And then we need to hold them all accountable, because they're all supposed to be serving us. And this is not something that I'm okay with any of them doing, obviously. So all those links that I've tossed in, I think, are a great place to start if you're newer to this topic and you want to delve in. Like Derrick said, there's a lot going on, and there's so many court cases, and there's so much information. It's a huge rabbit hole, but it's important to be aware of right now. Is there anything else that either of you wanted people to know, or a place that you wanted to send people that I could put a link in?
No, I just want to say thanks for talking with me, Emma, and thanks for what you've done, Sam. It's good to finally see you face to face. And I also agree that the work Whitney's been doing on Mint Press News has been amazing. A lot of it covers some of the things that I've put in video format, but I think it's important to have that information in written and as well as video form, because some people are going to watch a video, some people are going to read the article. She did a great job on that. I recommend everybody checking that out. And I see somebody asking, the website is theconsciousresistance.com. But thank you again.
Yep, I'll stick that in the comments one more time. Find Derrick at theconsciousresistance.com. And again, he is a contributor to The Mind Unleashed too. So we've got a lot of great articles by him. And I'm excited to see what you do with the next installment of your documentary on this topic. So thanks for joining, Derrick, and thank you, Sam. Is there anything else that you wanted to let people know, Sam?
Yeah, I would just say, as horrible and discouraging as this news has been, I mean, especially for some of us who have felt kind of personally invested in it, we also need to recognize how it's affecting the victims and not give up, because they've been waiting for justice a heck of a lot longer than any of us have, and we need to, stay hopeful, stay motivated to really keep this going, because it's a lot bigger than Epstein. Obviously, the connections that we know about are extraordinarily high profile, powerful people. So I think that is why there is such a hunger for it. People recognize that this does go into the halls of power, and has, extended for decades. So I think the more people do start to question the nature of our government and our reality and this kind of transnational crime syndicate, and just starting to look at it, not necessarily from a conspiratorial, mindset, but just a bigger picture of how these players have been around for decades, ranging, from the lawyers connected to Epstein up until his present day lawyers, to William Barr, to the Iran-Contra scandal. All of these things are connected. So if we keep pulling on the Epstein thread, a lot of these other things are going to start to line up, and hopefully, not only can we get justice for Epstein's victims, we can start to have a more just society that doesn't allow billionaires to get away with this kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah, especially getting justice for the people that have been affected by it, but also stop this system so this isn't something that continues into the future, because it has been something that's existed for decades, and it doesn't have to continue. If we're aware of it, if we try hard to put a stop to it now, hopefully it'll change the way this works.
Yeah, I think public pressure on some of the companies too that were connected to Epstein, including Victoria's Secret, that's something that we want to kind of mobilize around and take a bigger look at.
Yep, definitely. Well, thank you both for joining me. I'm right before we go, I'm just going to put our Patreon back up on the screen, because we've been, if you saw our last video that Derrick was on, we've been hit hard with censorship on Facebook, and our traffic.
Support the Minds Unleashed.
Yes.
Support.
Our traffic is tanking, and so we need you guys. Derrick is a great example of the way that independent minds and independent media folks are invested in these topics, and they go the extra mile that mainstream doesn't. So support the Mind Unleashed and support Derrick directly too. And I don't know if you're doing any sort of fundraising for yourself, Sam, and what you're doing, but if you've got anything like that, find that with Sam too. So support the people that are doing the work, because we've all got a piece to play in this. If you're not a journalist, if you're not going to do the research, that's fine. We don't need everybody doing that, but we can support the people who are doing that work, because that work is incredibly important right now. So thanks again, guys, for joining, and maybe we'll do this again sometime as stuff develops. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Please make sure you share this and look into a bunch of those links that I posted. There's a lot of them, but I believe you guys can do it. Thanks. Bye.